The dawn of the 20th century saw Carmel by the Sea emerging from the lush forest that lined the white sands of Monterey Bay. A modest beginning of Sunset School appeared on cleared land, and the seedling school grew into the teen years of the century. Some of the earliest alumni meet the first Monday of each month to share memories.
I was the first one of this group to attend Sunset School. I'm the oldest, or one of the first students that attended Sunset School in 1918. You kids are all too young for that. But it was a little school, and I have a picture of it here. 4 rooms. And I had a teacher named May Gashard. You may have known that name.
I know that.
Well, May Gashard skipped me from the 3rd grade to the 4th grade, so I moved from one side of the room to the other.
What year did you graduate?
1925,
And where were your pictures taken?
on the stairwell.
And that's where we used to take the children's yearly class pictures. We're on those
Right.
same steps.
I remember that. We were all a bunch of ragamuffins, weren't we?
We
sort
were.
of.
I think we were further down on these steps.
Yeah, kind of right down here.
Yeah.
I always got a kick out of the way we dressed back then.
Oh, yes.
Well, I remember Sunset.
I started in the 3rd grade, and I lived on Taurus in 12th, and we used to walk to school.
Oh, I did that.
And there was nobody between my house except Ruth Van Meter, and she would wait for me, and we'd arrive at Sunset. No buildings,
That's right.
no roads.
And you said the auditorium used to be a little schoolhouse?
Oh, well, the wooden schoolroom was where the auditorium is now,
Okay.
at which they moved down and then built the auditorium.
The alumni share anecdotes about Sunset as a venue for classical music.
My father was blind and always took his guide dogs to concerts. He and my mother sat up in the balcony in the first row where there was plenty of room for a guide dog. So Isaac Stern announced his encore, and in the silence that followed, my father's guide dog gave one of those characteristic German Shepherd groans. And Stern glanced up into the audience and said, "Oh, would you prefer I played something else?"
That's perfect.
Well, as a matter of fact, I graduated from here in 1932. Betty Uzel and I were the first 2 to graduate from that beautiful old auditorium.
Despite depression, City Council votes for auditorium, a headline in the Pinecone of 1931.
We were in a depression, but we didn't feel it.
That's right.
And you look in the photographs of the various classes and the children, we all had worn shoes, and one sock up and one sock down.
Yeah, but they weren't without.
We
Like
weren't
they
without,
were.
and we were all just very, very happy and content. And I don't remember ever hearing a word about depression.
We were all poor to start with.
When I was here, we had slate shingles for a roof, and
This is the slate off of Sunset.
And every once in
the
a
roof.
while,
Very
one
heavy.
would slip off and come down. And I remember, in the early 60s, they had a little wire fence all
That's right.
around the eaves to hold these up so they wouldn't fall on the students.
Alumni of the 40s and 50s looked down on the parking lot that once was their playground.
Remember we used to play out here on the playground and had recess as well as kickball and jungle gyms and jacks.
Slides.
Jacks and trading cards.
And
Jump rope, yes.
Foursquare.
And dodgeball.
And dodgeball.
I guess it was
they
fifth
wouldn't
was
let
then.
the boys play down here with the girls. They kept us on the windy side of it.
That was later.
Yeah,
You
but
guys.
that was only when we were invited.
That's right.
Yours was a bad class. They had to separate you guys.
That's right. Well, okay.
There's something else I remember is the May festivals every year. And each class had a maypole, and we practiced for weeks, probably months, and that was big excitement.
We would have some wonderful programs. Denny Watrous and Hazel Watrous and Dean Denny would get some outstanding stars.
Yeah. They had Ace Pines at one time.
Marian Anderson.
Yeah, that's right.
The Carmel Music Society was founded in 1927 by Denny and Watrous, who hosted the first concerts in their own art galleries, and then, later, in the new Sunset Auditorium. Igor Stravinsky earned much-needed fees in the 30s, performing as a pianist, accompanying a much less memorable singer. The great ballerina Alicia Markova was photographed by Carl Van Vechten when she danced at Sunset Center. And Martha Graham performed 3 times on our stage. The remarkable photographer Imogen Cunningham made these famous nude portraits of the legendary dancer. But the Sunset Stage continued to be a school auditorium, with more conventional dance programs presented by June Delight and other directors. War bond rallies shared the space during World War II, and the student paper, The Scoop, indeed scooped the other community journals with the first news of that war. Dean Denny and Hazel Watrous again had made cultural history in our midst with the creation in 1935 of the Carmel Bach Festival.
Well, the festival's changed quite a bit. I guess the most obvious thing is that it has gone from a 2-week festival. It started out as a weekend festival back in 1935, but when I came it was 2 weeks long, and it's now grown to 22 days, 3 weeks plus a weekend. It's a festival now that draws on artists from all over the world.
Bruno Weil, esteemed European conductor, took over the podium in the mid-90s, and the international reputation of the festival continued to grow. Bruno Weil's predecessor of many years was the beloved Sándor Salgó.
My predecessor, Gaston Usilli, died, I think, 2 weeks before. And so Dean Denny phoned me, said that they are searching for conductors. Would I come down to Carmel? And this was about March 15, I think, 1956, and discuss a little bit the possibility that I would come to take over the festival. So I did go, and we agreed immediately, and I felt it was a great honor, and so it started a long and wonderful association of 36 years.
A generation of music directors, Heimo Teuber and Sándor Salgó, who escaped from Germany in the 30s and 40s and came to the United States and were really instrumental in developing these institutions. And so much of what we were, what we are now, is a result of the kinds of ideas he brought with him. And they were real orchestra builders.
The Monterey Symphony has continued to develop splendidly through the years, and recently made history.
At Carmel Sunset Center this afternoon, the music was the same graceful harmony audiences have come to expect from the Monterey Symphony Orchestra. But for more than half a century, the conductor with his back turned to the audience wore a tuxedo. Today, she wore a dress. Kate Tamarkin is already breaking barriers as one of just a handful of female conductors in the world. Today, she made Central Coast history as the first woman to lead the Monterey Orchestra.
Well, the first time I ever conducted professionally, a man came up afterwards and said, "You're pretty good for a girl."
A tisket, a tasket, a brown and yellow basket.
Great classical music continued to enrich our community as great jazz performances shared center stage. Ella Fitzgerald's Evening in Carmel was only one of the memorable events that were the precursors of the Monterey Jazz Festival. Duke Ellington, Cal Tjader, Dave Brubeck, and Errol Garner played and recorded at Sunset Center. Garner's jazz classic, Misty, was introduced here. The incredible cultural life of Sunset Center was achieved with minimal backstage space or conveniences. Joan DeVisser tells of a Russian pianist's reaction to the dressing rooms.
And as I took her down to the dressing room, and I opened the door for her, and I had fixed it up as nicely as I could, And she poked her head in, and she looked one way, and then the other way, and she looked at me and said, just like Russia.
Years later, a tent was put up to satisfy Marilyn Horne's desire to have private space nearer the stage.
When I saw that striped tent, I said to myself, this simply will not do.
Cramped conditions did not stop attempts at fully staged performances, as Sándor Salgó proved with the opera performances like Magic Flute. Marcia Hovik, veteran Carmel performer, director, and teacher, recreates some of the theater events at Sunset Center.
Of course, the first thing we did when we moved here in 1956 was plunge into everything that was happening at Sunset. We moved into room 20 downstairs, and for a whole year we acted in that, what once was a cafeteria of Sunset, and it wasn't until the Children's Experimental Theater grew out of the community theater down at the Circle that we ever took up residence here. We staged one Christmas the Townley play, complete with medieval dances and Barbara Schuler.
Well, these are the wings that I wore as the Archangel Gabriel in the Townley plays that Marcia Hovik directed about 30 years ago. And that was quite a performance for me, first time I'd been an angel. But my strongest memory is when I went to the women's room after a rehearsal, a dress rehearsal, and went into the stalls and found myself stuck in there because of these wings. I could not get out, and it was a little terrifying. And I remember my mother said, you know, angels don't even go to places like that.
Another ladies' room crisis is recalled by Joan DeVisser from the days when she was chief usher at Sunset.
The women were backed up, and it was almost time for the end of the intermission, and so somebody came and got me and said, Joan, there seems to be a problem. Somebody went in and they've never come out. I went in, and the stall door was closed, and I said, is there a problem? Hoping the voice would say no. And she said, yes, I'm stuck. And I said, well, if you open the door, maybe I can help you. And she said, I can't. So I had to get down on my hands and knees and crawl under the door, and the heel of her shoe had gone through the elastic, and of course it snapped up, and she was standing on one leg. I'm pulling this down, and I'm trying to be very careful not to hurt her as I cut her out of her underwear. And the poor woman was red in the face and hyperventilating almost because she was so tired standing on one high heel.
The restroom, they're exactly the same as they were in 1932.
In the remodel, we'll have restrooms for everyone. Certainly not one for each, but it was really terrible during the intermissions. It would take, you know, much longer than you'd want for an intermission to go on. And the women had a particular problem. The lines going all the way back. A couple of times we'd find young women trying to sneak into the men's restroom to get back in time for curtain.
I have some very special memories of the theater, two in particular. The first had to do with the small theater, where I directed and played in a runner-up for the Festival of First program that year. It was a play on Hemingway, and I played Papa. I'm not sure that it was too memorable a performance.
Boardman was later acclaimed for another play here.
I will never forget the opening night here back in 1985 and how pleased and proud I was, and I felt pretty good about the play, as did the audience.
Robinson Jeffers brought a major theater event to Sunset Center when he invited Dame Judith Anderson to read his poetry here.
Some lucky day each November, great waves awake and are drawn like smoking mountains bright from the west and come and cover the cliff with white violent cleanness.
In 1976, the Carmel Music Society brought youthful vigor to the musical scene with the annual Young Musicians Competition. Recently, this 20-year-old Chinese pianist joined the ranks of those musicians who have gone on to fully professional careers.
I just get a chance to play on really good pianos because at home I have a really bad one. My piano is called Red October because it's from Russia. So, and it's really old, and so.
18-year-old Jan Vitko from Russia is another.
The piano here is amazing. I think it's the best piano I've ever played on.
The tension of suspense is on the faces of these young singers from another recent competition.
The decisions of the judges are final and free of any influence by the board of the Carmel Music Society. I'd ask the following 3 musicians to come to the stage, and we will read their names in alphabetical order. Kenneth Goodson, Corinne Larson, and Jenny Samuelson.
The pain of loss is an inevitable part of the young competitors' lives. Other young musical artists are afforded the opportunity to participate in still another competition sponsored by Chamber Music Monterey Bay.
For 27 years, Chamber Music Monterey Bay and Chamber Music Society before then presented a international chamber music competition called the Carmel Chamber Music Competition. That was held exclusively in Sunset Center. For 27 years, we have wonderful string quartets and woodwind trios and saxophone quartets, any kind of chamber ensemble from the best conservatories in the country and even from other countries. We had groups from Canada, we had a winning group last year from the United Kingdom, entrants from Japan and Finland, and these groups, many of them have gone on to be professional touring ensembles. Chamber Music Monterey Bay started presenting in Sunset Center in about 1970 or 1971. When we started in 1966, we presented in smaller venues around the Monterey Peninsula. But by 1971, we had a membership basis, an audience base of about 500 people, and so we needed to go into Sunset Center, where we'd been since 1970, 31 years in Sunset Center. We've presented basically the best world-class chamber music organizations in the world. We've had the Juilliard String Quartet, the Tokyo String Quartet, Emerson String Quartet, Eroica Trio, basically the top touring ensembles in the world.
In 1965, Sunset's principal Orville Rogers turned over the keys of the beloved school to the city of Carmel. The first cultural director for the city was Cole Weston, who, since his 1932 graduation from Sunset, had followed in the Weston family tradition as a famed photographer. He recounts that 1966 transition.
This was my office. It didn't enter from here. We entered it from out in front, but it was entirely different than this. And I had all these vacant rooms. So I called up Ansel one day and I said, Ansel, why don't you have a photographic center here? I said, I have a perfect room for you. It was a logical place for it because you have Beaumont Newhall, you had Ansel Adams, you had Brett Weston, my father, Edward Weston, great photographers in this area. And this is a perfect place to have a photographic center.
I think it was 1984 that Clint Eastwood ran for mayor. And the responsibility of taking care of all the incoming newsmen was put into my office. We had quite a time with that. But anyway, I have 2 pictures here that were taken when he was finally elected and walked into the room to accept the nomination. I didn't think it was a wise idea to give any preference outside of the pine cone. Why, they all came in at the same time, and Clint arrived with some policemen to help keep the crowds away from him, and we had a wonderful time.
Sunset Center has been just marvelous for years and years and years with classical music, with the Bach Festival and the Symphony and our chamber groups and Mozart and what have you. One of the things that we haven't been doing was contemporary work, and so we started a thing called Performance Carmel, and then we started bringing in dance, music, and theater, contemporary dance, music, and theater, and that balanced out what was already going on here.
Jean Grace, former mayor, revisits the theater that was an important part of her life.
This is such a beautiful auditorium with its high-peaked arches. And it's a fascinating time for me because here I am sitting in some of the front rows, which I didn't have a chance to do while I was ushering for 10 years for the Bach Festival. When I became mayor in 1988, I realized that I probably shouldn't keep ushering for the Bach Festival. And during the time I was mayor in 1989, we were able to celebrate the burning of the bond that had been floated by the city council to buy this beautiful theater, the whole property, running from 8th Avenue to 10th Avenue. My privilege in 1989, and the mayor who succeeded me, who is Ken White, was on the council at that time.
I made the motion on the city council to begin the process of renovation. And when I was elected mayor in 1992, we were well underway. It's taken 8 years, and at one time I counted over 150 meetings in those 8 years for the development of the plans, of fundraising, and getting the community to come together behind the plan.
Nancy and Bill Doolittle have been in the vanguard of organizers and developers of the Campaign for Sunset.
Of 1992, when the city appointed a task force to look at the possibility of renovating Sunset. And then out of that task force grew the nonprofit 501c3. We set ourselves up specifically to raise funds for the renovation. And then Bill got involved subsequent to that.
I think that was 98 when we got involved, and it was about that time that we began the fundraising feasibility study, which we thought was really important to get a feel for what the community's support level might be.
I couldn't see why they would want to spend millions and millions of dollars to change it. They're not going to increase the capacity of it, but it'll just make it acoustically better.
The major desire among the user groups was for better acoustics, a bigger stage. We have a tiny proscenium opening now. That's going to be widened. We're going to do everything structurally to improve the acoustics. Currently, we have dead spots.
We've been very encouraged with the broad-based community support that this project has received. To date, we've had something like donations from over 880 individuals or organizations in the community. And I think that demonstrated to the city that there really was a wide appeal for this project moving forward. And everyone really realized that this 70-year-old facility really needed some attention, and that if it was really going to be useful to the community, we really needed to do something fairly dramatic to give it another 70 years of life.
We put the project out to bid and for construction, and the lowest bid came in more than $3 million over budget. And fortunately now, the City Council and Mayor Sue McLeod have stepped up to the plate just beautifully here with a $9.9 million bond issuance. They worked so hard to get the bond rating for the city increased, and the bond is now being issued as of yesterday. So this has closed the gap and has gotten us to the position now where we can move forward with construction.
October 24th, 2001 saw the Doolittles don hard hats, joining Carmel Mayor Sue McLeod, former Mayor Ken White in the groundbreaking ceremony.
With a shovel, and we will get on with the groundbreaking.
Applauding the hard-won campaign victory are some of the most generous and hard-working supporters of Campaign for Sunset. The exciting transition from the old Sunset Center to the new and improved one is celebrated by a farewell gala, Segway.
We want to welcome you to the closing of one chapter in the history of this theater and the beginning of another. And Bill and I represent the public-private partnership, and in plain English that means the city and the fundraisers.
This could be the start of something big.
For Segway, the last performance in the beloved auditorium, Peggy Brown sings and Bob Phillips' band swings.
You suddenly hear a bell, and right away you can tell that this could be the start of something. This could be the heart of something. This could be the start of something big. This could be the start of something big.
Kenny Stahl's quartet performs. Carmel's troubadour and people's poet Rick Maston presents his poetic salute to
I
sunset.
first entered this building in Mrs. Trowbridge's kindergarten, 1934. Don't clap about being old. I mean. In 7th grade, I'm chosen to speak on Fire Prevention Week. Parents, students, faculty, friends. Then blank. My mind an empty, wordless page. Fire engine red, humiliated, I blindly stumble from the stage. I was backstage the night Errol Garner pounded the hell out of the Ivories. Jazz at Sunset sold over 1 million copies, and only the stage crew knew prejudice had played its ugly part in that fiery performance, Errol having been refused local toilet privileges. And I'm told the contralto Marian Anderson was forced to dine in a private home. But Sunset has always and only been talent conscious and color blind.
Bruce Lamott leads the Carmel Bach Festival Chorus in an ironic ode to the well-loved and much maligned old Sunset
The
Auditorium.
lyrics, however, were written by the firm of McKay, Conant, Brook, Incorporated after their visit to Sunset Auditorium in 1993, bringing us the news.
Sound-absorbing materials were first employed during the 1920s and 30s. Carmel Sunset Center Auditorium is an excellent example. With its porous acoustical plaster walls and absorptive fiberboard ceiling, the resulting acoustic environment is very much like listening outdoors. This is appropriate for speech, popular music, and small ensembles. When listening in the front half-dozen rows. But as one moves back in the auditorium, where most of the audience is located, sound levels fall off rapidly. Speech becomes difficult to and music loses all excitement. Hallelujah! 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 Hallelujah!
Members of the Carmel Fire Department and Police Force joined the Monterey Symphony in Haydn's Toy Symphony, conducted by Adam Flack. Monterey Symphony brought the gala to a dazzling conclusion, playing Saint-Saëns' Carnival of the Animals, accompanying Ogden Nash verses read by Carmel celebrities. The cast assembles on the stage for the final bows. And the full ensemble leads the audience in a heartfelt final salute to Sunset Center Auditorium, singing Auld Lang Syne.